We finally made it to the Grand Line, and if the Alabasta Saga is just the beginning, I can't wait to see what comes next, because honestly, it has some of my favorite moments in manga and anime ever. Hello and welcome to Matt Reads Manga, a channel where I'm reading and watching One Piece for the first time. And if the East Blue wasn't for you, I think the Alabasta Saga, or Arabasta Saga, depending on which version you're reading, will be, because they honestly are really different. Now, last time we finished in East Blue, we'd gotten the map to the Grand Line where we're setting sail for Reverse Mountain. Unless you're watching the anime where we get our first full filler arc with the Lost Island or Warship Island arc. And it's sort of just okay, and I might be grading it on a curve there. We'll dive into it. One of the biggest issues with the Warship Island arc is it does have some continuity errors, and that's speaking from someone who's only seen up to Alabasta, so there could be even more. I'm just not far enough along to notice. It's a story about a girl named Appi who's taking care of a dragon named Ryu, otherwise known as Grandpa Ryu or Grandpa Dragon, and he's a millennial dragon from a place called Lost Island that, get this, is lost. So lost, in fact, that no one knows where it is, kind of like something else in this series.
I left everything I gathered together in one place. Now you just have to find it.
There's a moment where Zoro just cuts straight through a massive steel chain that's used for an anchor.
You cut him?
There isn't anything I can't cut.
Only later in the Alabasta Saga to have a huge, momentous personal moment where he learns to cut through steel. Honestly, I forgot about that moment until I went back and started doing notes for this review, and I was like, wait a second, hold on. Zoro just cut through literally an anchor, and then later it's a big moment for him, so just take this arc with a grain of salt if you're watching the anime. Also, there's another point in the arc where Luffy can just suddenly talk to or understand animals.
どうしてわかったの？リュウジーの心が。なんとなくだ。なんとなくって。
You know what, and now that I'm thinking about it, maybe this arc just really isn't that good. But hey, at least the 4Kids version actually skipped it, so that actually gives the 4Kids version of One Piece a little bit of canon credibility. And by the way, after a lot of comments, I checked out the 4Kids version for the first time after you guys recommended me to look at it in some of my TikToks and shorts, and wow.
Don't give it up, Luffy. Don't give it up, Zolo. Don't give it up, Nami.
Now that we've finished Warship Island, or in the manga, we're making our way up Reverse Mountain, which is what we have to do to enter the Grand Line. There we meet Laboon, once again, another sad animal story to kick this whole saga off. Last time it was Chow Chow the dog, and this time it's a whale who wants nothing more than to see his friends again, and honestly, it's just so heartbreaking. Oda does a great job with animals. He did in East Blue, and here he's doing it again in the Alabasta Saga, and it just feels so bad for this whale. He's even got scars all over his face. He's just this lovable, lovable character. And then honestly, at the end, when Luffy basically stabs him with the ship mast, it's such a hilarious moment because it happens like out of nowhere. They finally calmed this whale down, but Luffy does it to give him something to fight for. It was actually a great moment. I hope that in the future, Luffy does live up to the promise he made Laboon to come back and fight him at some point. After that, we head to Whisky Peak, which is another short arc. It's only a couple episodes and only a few chapters, where we meet Miss Wednesday, an agent of Baroque Works, and her lovable pet duck, Karoo. I just loved both of those characters, and we'll get more into them here in a bit and throughout this review, since they're kind of the focal point. Well, at least Vivi is. But you know what? I don't want to discredit Karoo, because Karoo is great, and he deserves all the recognition he can possibly get. And honestly, there were moments, especially in the Alabasta arc itself, where I was getting real nervous about Karoo. And I was sort of thinking, if anything happens to Karoo, we're going to have some problems. Either way, both of them temporarily join the Straw Hats as we learn a little bit more about them, and we know that their kingdom, Alabasta, is under siege, being controlled by the evil warlord Crocodile, who is honestly an amazing villain. Both Reverse Mountain and Whisky Peak are relatively short in the grand scheme of things, but we head to what I sort of really consider the first main part of the Grand Line, which is Little Garden. And honestly, it is the funniest arc in One Piece so far, where we meet the giants of Elbath, Dory and Bragi. Both of these giants have been fighting a battle that's been going on over 100 years. It's very much like a Hatfield and McCoy situation where they've been fighting for so long they don't even remember what it is they're fighting about. We also see dinosaurs on this island, and it's our first indication that things on the Grand Line are going to be very different than we saw in East Blue. At least we see in this saga, has its own weather pattern, has its own type of creatures and animals, and every island just feels so different. It's really cool and refreshing to see what's going on here. And we got to see these dinosaurs. I mean, Luffy gets off the boat, sees a dinosaur, and literally just pulls himself up top as he wants to ride this dinosaur. It's hilarious. And this whole arc itself was really like a comedic relief kind of arc. Now back to Dory and Bragi. They're fighting this battle every time this volcano goes off. And also I was kind of beginning to wonder, is it something about this island itself? Because at the same time that these guys were learning about their fight, we're learning about what they're doing, and they just keep wanting to fight each other, Zoro and Sanji are sort of having this contest, like a hunting contest to see who can get the most meat, who can bring back the biggest animals. And we see them almost slipping into the same thing where you could see, hey, I wonder if these guys, kind of curious, and they didn't touch on it or anything. It's just something I kind of noticed. Now, one of the best moments of Little Garden was the fact that Usopp finally felt like he was actually sort of really getting dialed in on these giants, and he was really looking at them, and you could tell that he was honestly so inspired by these battles that they were doing. And he was saying, I want to go to Elbath one day. This is like, you know, an honorable thing that these people are doing. Remember, his whole deal is he wants to be brave. But for a character whose entire personality is based on lying, to see him in this moment actually looking at this and something that felt very, very genuine because he'd really have no reason to lie about it, it was honestly really refreshing and kind of caused me, you know, I think Usopp is probably my least favorite of the Straw Hats, kind of caused me to look at him in a little more light. And I think he's, you know, slowly ticking up on my favorability scale of the Straw Hats. So after Little Garden, we head to Drum Island, and I have very mixed feelings about Drum Island. I felt Little Garden was just sort of good. It was just sort of good all throughout. It wasn't great. It wasn't epic. It didn't have like moments that were bad or moments that were amazing. It just sort of flatline good across the bar. Drum Island, it has some lows, and I felt like it had some highs, but the highs were so good that it overshadowed the lows. So Drum Island is a kingdom, and that's sort of the theme for the next two, or the final two arcs in this saga. It felt like we were actually kind of doing the same thing in Drum Island and in Alabasta. So I think for me, Wapol as a villain, I just wasn't that into. He just felt like an evil ruler for the sake of being evil. And then with Alabasta being next and sort of a similar structure, but the real strength of this arc is our new member of the Straw Hats, Tony Chopper. And just when I thought Nami had the saddest backstory, Chopper basically came in and said, hold my beer, and did one better.
Even if I should disappear right now, my dream will come true. I've had a marvelous life. Thank you so much, Chopper.
At first, I was just sort of like a fun play on Rudolph the reindeer with the blue nose. And then we learned that Chopper has the ability to transform into not just 3, but about 7 different forms. And it was honestly giving me a little bit of PTSD from Dragon Ball. And I was thinking the next thing out of Chopper's mouth is going to be, you haven't even seen my final form. But thankfully, we didn't go down that route. But the route we did go down was just this mad scientist, Dr. Hilrook, whose whole goal is to get cherry blossoms to grow in this snowy climate. And unfortunately, he doesn't live to see his dream come completely true, as he's suffering from a terminal illness and then is accidentally poisoned by Chopper in an attempt to save him. Chopper sees this symbol in a medical book that has a skull and crossbones on it. And previously, Hilrook had told Chopper that that is the symbol of the pirates, and that is like the best symbol that exists in the world. So Chopper sees it in this book and thinks this plant could save the doctor, but it's actually poison because it's in a medical book, and that's the same symbol for poison. So he accidentally poisons him, and then Dr. Kreia sees what Chopper did and sort of ridicules him. Hilrook goes to Wapol, and he knows that Wapol's coming after him because he's a doctor and he shouldn't be out there. And Hilrook ends up sacrificing himself before the poison itself can kill him or his terminal illness. He doesn't let Chopper be the reason that he died. Now, the other big character who I briefly mentioned is Dr. Kreia, who is this witch doctor who was so great, and I felt like has a lot more knowledge about things going on in the world, as she drops one of the most massive bombshells.
D ロジャーを知ってるかい？
D？ ゴールドロジャーのことですか？
生きていたのか？ D の
Goal D Roger, as in like Monkey D Luffy. And then she talks about the legend of D, just sort of briefly mentions it, and that's kind of it. So it's like, what just happened? Talk about a massive bombshell. So now all I'm thinking is Luffy related to Gold Roger? Is he kind of like the reincarnated version of Gold Roger? That's sort of what I felt like, especially like the live action versions influencing me a little bit, where Mihawk says, he reminds me of him a lot. I feel like we should keep him around. And speaking of the live action version, in season 2, there's a lot of rumors and speculation that Jamie Lee Curtis could play Dr. Kreia, who would honestly be like perfect for that role. And I guess she's a huge fan of the series, and Chopper is actually her favorite character. So, hey, could fit right into that arc. It'd be great. Drum Island out of the way, we move into arguably the best arc in the whole series so far, where I'm at. Alabasta is absolutely amazing. First of all, we now fully meet Ace, Luffy's brother, who also has a pretty crazy devil fruit power that he can just shoot fire. I mean, that's got to be a pretty useful power. And also, like, I have another question. At this point, does basically everyone have devil fruit power? Sometimes they just say fruit. I'm assuming it's all devil fruit powers, but it just feels like, I don't know, Oprah's in there, like, you get one and you get one and you get one. Feels like everybody's got a devil fruit power at this point. And with all these people eating fruits that grant powers, you'd think we'd see like the tree or the bush or where these things come from. I mean, is like, I don't know, I'm sure somebody's asked this before, but is like the devil fruit tree the One Piece? I mean, it feels like it'd be a pretty powerful thing. Ace invites Luffy to join his crew with Whitebeard, but Luffy says no, and then he gives Luffy a piece of paper that we don't see what's on it, and it's really, again, sort of teasing what's to come. Oda did a great job of this, talking about the Grand Line back in East Blue, and now it's like the Legend of D, and what's this thing Ace gave to Luffy, so kind of setting things up for after we finish. Like I said earlier, I felt like this arc was a little long, and even longer in the anime, but it's honestly because there's just a lot of moving pieces, and they do all generally come together in the end for an amazing finish. You've got Bon Clay, who stole the identities of the Straw Hats and can use anyone else's identity to keep in the back of your mind. The rest of Baroque Works, Nico, Robin, and of course Crocodile. And can I say, I just loved Crocodile as a villain. This like ultra mobster gangster who's also incredibly powerful, and not just any old pirate. He's one of the 7 warlords of the sea, and man, do they display that power. When he battles Luffy, his fights are epic and by far some of the best fights in the series so far. I love that Luffy just got absolutely wrecked by him in the first 2 fights, because really up until this point, Luffy's handled just about everyone that's been thrown at him. So to see him lose not once but twice was really sort of refreshing, and it actually kind of reminded me in a different way of Dragon Ball. Not Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball Super, or I guess Dragon Ball Magic. That's a video for another day. But original Dragon Ball, where Master Roshi, aka Jackie Chun, enters the World Martial Arts Tournament to beat Goku when he's a kid because he feels like Goku needs a challenge. Now, that's not exactly the way it's happening here, but I felt like it's more sort of Oda in the writing process being like, I think it's time Luffy takes an L so that he has to overcome something, overcome someone to sort of get that next step. And honestly, I feel like it was great. I mean, Luffy didn't just take an L. I mean, he got wrecked. Now, the backdrop to this fight was really where I feel like this entire Saga and this arc specifically shine. You have the warring factions between the kingdoms and the rebels, the dance powder that causes rain but dries things up in the other regions, so there's a lot of things at stake as to why people would want to fight against each other. You've got Princess Vivi there, who also doesn't know exactly how to just get the fighting to stop, which is really her whole goal. And then you've got the Straw Hats all taking on their own people individually. Usopp gives Nami this new weapon, the weather rod. There's just so many moving pieces. And then finally the Marines come in. Everything felt like it was truly hectic and truly mattered in this arc. You also have Zoro fighting Mr. One, and he just super levels up in this fight. I mean, he's able to now cut steel, unless you watch the Warship Island arc, but you see him, you get the flashback to him training and then learning to be able to cut through steel. Also, Zoro lifts a building. I was like, I don't remember Zoro being that strong, but hey, this is sort of his level up fight. You know, Luffy's getting his. Felt like definitely this was the next evolution of these characters here. And then, like I said, you also have the Marines. Captain Smoker got a lot more time in this arc, and it was great to sort of see his ambition and what he's going after. And he kind of feels like at this point he's on his own mission with the Marines. It doesn't seem exactly clear as to what he's doing. And Tashigi as well aids the Straw Hats, and then she kind of, doesn't really know how she feels about it at the end. And actually, I was kind of wondering here, after watching the live action version, felt like maybe some of the stuff I'm now seeing here, which is my first time watching it, was kind of pulled in and given to like Kobe in the live action version, because Kobe really isn't in East Blue that much. And he kind of goes through a similar thing. And of course, he's dealing with Garp. So I'm actually wondering if some of that was probably brought forward for some of you people who have seen the live action version, as well as now the Alabasta arc, and maybe know a little bit where these characters go. If you could, spoiler free, of course, maybe leave some comments and think maybe just what your thoughts on that were. If you're looking at this now and being like, oh yeah, maybe that it was the pieces. That's just sort of what I thought. Then we see that the world and the Marines essentially cover up the fact that Luffy and the Straw Hats had any involvement in Crocodile being defeated, other than giving him a much larger bounty. And then you have Princess Vivi, who's faced with a very tough dilemma. Does she stay or does she go with the Straw Hats? And ultimately she chooses to stay in her kingdom. And that is also just a great moment. It's so heartbreaking for her to honestly have to say bye to her friends. And that's something that happens a lot in this series, as it is, in a way, the friends we make along the way. But the final shot of them holding up their hands, holding up their arms with their armbands, pulled off with the X's that were on it, so they could conceal their identities from Bon Clay, who we knew could turn into any of them. To see that moment when they can't say anything because the Marines are closing in was just so powerful. It was honestly one of the most emotional moments in the series so far. Now, I will say, if I have to give a negative to the Alabasta arc itself, I felt like if anybody took a back seat, and honestly maybe this entire saga, not just the Alabasta arc, but really this entire saga, I felt like Sanji kind of got a little lost in this saga. I mean, he's really not even in Little Garden. I mean, he's there, and he actually has a very important moment when he's talking to Crocodile, pretending to be someone he's not, that comes all the way back into play in the Alabasta arc. But other than that, I felt like Sanji just really wasn't around a lot in this saga as a whole. I mean, he had moments, but I felt like they gave a lot of time to the other people, especially the newer people, Vivi and Chopper. Now, real quickly on the anime side, I do want to mention that we did get 2 new intro songs. I sort of just felt like the second one is just okay. After hearing it about 3 or 4 times, I kind of got tired of it. But the third one, in both English and in Japanese, is absolutely amazing.
Think back to the time when my search first began. I left behind those shores of sand for the endless, everlasting world out there.
Though it does accidentally spoil that Nico Robin is going to be joining the crew. There's a character I haven't really talked a lot about in this review, comes into the fray there at the end when she's reading the Poneglyph, and we learn, hey, she can read this ancient text. Also, what is this ancient text? Is this something we should be keeping an eye on, paying attention to. Crocodile's using her because he thinks she can read this text that is going to give them information on this super powerful weapon called Pluto. Ultimately, that's not the way it ends up going. So he betrays her, but she's going to be joining the crew. And, I think in the next arc, we'll get to learn a lot more about her. The entire saga as a whole had everything. A power struggle against a corrupt government, the secret agents of Baroque work, the Marines faced with decisions about loyalty and doing what's actually good for the world. The Straw Hats, in a way, actually kind of take a backseat in, honestly, this whole saga. Now, the advantage of doing that compared to the East Blue, where it's essentially all character development, is Oda actually allows the plot and, most importantly, the world building to kind of take center stage in his writing process here. And I feel like it's for the better, especially as we enter the Grand Line. And what you really get is that you get to see the importance of the Straw Hats and Luffy, especially as they shine through all of these different moments that are taking place. While they're center stage, they're not the focal point really of the arcs themselves. And I just felt like it worked out for the better, as we really felt like the world expanded and got far more interesting. We started out this saga having only left for the Grand Line, and we finished it having saved not only one, but 2 kingdoms. We defeated one of the 7 warlords of the sea. We met magical and mystical creatures and people, islands with dinosaurs, and in some way we earned some respect of the Marines, all the while acquiring a larger bounty, which should only lead to more trouble in the future. And speaking of the future, Oda did such a great job in this saga of leaving more breadcrumbs for future episodes, like I said earlier. As we finish the Alabasta Saga, we have the breadcrumbs of Ace and the legend of D, Goal, D, Roger, and the Poneglyphs, Nico, Robin, and hey, is there only 6 warlords of the sea now? There's a lot to look forward as we head into the next saga, which is what I'm going to do right now, because I'm so ready to dive right into the next manga chapter and the next anime episode. So with that, I want to say thank you guys as always for watching. Like I said, leave me a comment. Let me know what you guys think. I might start doing these in arcs, because when I do a whole saga, I feel like I don't have enough time to really dive into the nitty-gritty of it. It just kind of depends. Some arcs are small, so maybe I'll just look ahead and see how big things are. But either way, leave me a comment. Do you want me to cover an entire saga at once? Do you want me to cover an arc at once? I would really appreciate and love your guys' feedback on these videos. So with that, as always, guys, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.